Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. All right. Welcome, everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors, co-host of the shows, here with us. Kevin, glad to have you back.
Good to be presenting, always new news.
Yeah, well, you just finished your I guess, marathon around the state, all the county offices of ed, with your governor's budget updates, which everyone really appreciates. The legislative analysts just came out with their summary. I was wondering if you could enlighten us on what that looks like.
Yeah. So, there are multiple things that obviously we talked about in the budget workshop statewide about what's going on with education. The notable things are that, most everybody knows already is that the governor ends up putting a budget together that protects almost all of the major investments that were made last summer for the budget year we're in the middle of. And again, whenever the governor's proposing a budget, he usually messes around with the prior year, the current year, and next year, but he protects everything that was a permanent ongoing investment. He even protects a lot of the one-time investments that he's made in the budget. There's only a couple of areas that are controversial. One is the $1.2 billion proposed cut that he would have to the smaller of two block grants that were in the current year. That one block grant for art, music, and instruction materials, he would slice $1.2 billion off of that in the middle of the current year. So, of course, that's controversial, but he uses the money to help pay for a COLA next year. So there's good and bad to that. I think you're going to hear from school people about that. And again, it kind of depends on what happens with the economy going forward. But that's one of the spots. The fact that there's an undermining of what little we were going to get to use for STRS and PERS relief is a problem. And then $0 next year on STRS PERS. And then finally, we're going to have to deal with attendance somehow, because attendance numbers are still off this year. That was actually not expected. We know there's a lot of declining enrollment, and that was certainly expected. But the unique kind of ADA attendance issues that we're facing this year is an extension of sort of what we've experienced during the COVID years. And it's the result of a number of different issues: the flu season, the continuation of people that are coming down with COVID, a number of anomalous circumstances that are going to actually have to get addressed yet another year. That's going to be a heavy political lift. So there are those nuances to it. But overall, this budget is what I've referred to. People are getting used to my little saying. It's the best bad year budget I've ever seen. Now, your point, Tim, is that the Ledge analyst came out with a review of this budget today. And in that review of the budget, which is sort of fresh off the presses, and then on the heels of our going out everywhere doing budget workshops, they point out a couple of things. And some of it we were anticipating, and we actually pointed out during our workshops, which is they have a decidedly more pessimistic view of what's going to happen with this economy. So in each of the two major fiscal years, current year and next year, they're projecting that we've got a problem that's worse by $2 billion below where the governor says revenues are going to be coming in each of those 2 years. And so that obviously makes the number a little hard to get at. They are suggesting a couple of different things. Some of it is new, some of it we hadn't seen before. One of the couple of ideas that the legislative analysts had last November, actually, when they had their own revenue estimates back then, they've sort of reprised in this report, which is one that we ought to be looking at actually a COLA that's below maybe what we would otherwise be entitled to. Shave that COLA back by a certain amount. The other has to do with the ELOP program, which makes a very big investment in expanded learning opportunity. And that is that to the degree that some districts are expressing hesitancy over the fact that we've got a major staffing shortage in this state. And so to the degree that they're having difficulty implementing, the idea is guarantee to every district that's ready to implement, the money will be there. But if a district, in fact, isn't ready and doesn't want to utilize that money, why don't we score some savings, is kind of their thought about it. Beyond that, they also call into question the $300 million of permanent ongoing money that's in this budget for the addition to the LCFF, this new effort that the governor is trying to make on addressing the needs of kids that are in the lowest performing subgroup. But he actually has the money go out, $300 million go out, based on a very high targeted poverty index, and that is the equity multiplier. So that $300 million, the legislative analysts draw some question about in terms of doing that. So there are a number of different pockets of money that they're scoring some savings on that will meet, I imagine, with some objection from the governor's office. And I'm not even so sure how wild the legislature is going to be about cutting back some of this stuff. What's really going to depend upon is what happens to revenue over the next couple of months. And I don't think they're going to be prepared to cut back on where the governor's at until they see numbers that are actually negative, beyond the depth of the negative numbers the governor's anticipating on his own. But it's out there. It's going to shape some of the debate around this budget as hearings get underway. And it also shaped the conversation that we have as educators when we go to the Capitol to do our advocacy. So that's kind of the latest on budget issues in a really quick soundbite.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I like the best bad budget year ever. And you, like you said, we have to wait to find out what the state revenues are going to be, and that May revise is going to be a much clearer picture. You remember last year, it was great news. So hopefully it'd be even better bad news than the best you've ever seen, if we can just put more B's into that statement.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to add that kind of complicates the May revise being clearer for us is that because, again, there are more than half the counties in the state that were declared as emergency condition, basically, and given a waiver of the April 15th tax filing deadline, pushing it off to May 15th, we're going to have a lot of tax filers, particularly in those upper income levels, who will take advantage of that, keep their money for an extra month, and pay it later, which is going to delay our sense of what's going on with the numbers. So that doesn't really help us. But I will tell you that there probably will be a May revise on time, because even in the midst of COVID, when the governor had no numbers, because we were pushing off filing in well into the summer, they did do a May revise. It was all a guess, but they did do a May revision. And of course, it was way the heck off. It projected revenue declines that were way beyond what ended up happening. In fact, we didn't end up seeing those declines. So we got to brace for potentially still not all that great news as we get into the months toward the May revision, and then hope that the economy starts to rebound in a way that really some of these economic variables just defy logic, like what's going on with regard to employment. It is not your typical recession, that's for sure. And there's still a question about whether we formally get into a recession under the definition that economists use. I'm just hoping and praying that this thing's going to turn around, but we have to operate budgets in public education with an eye toward kind of the worst case scenario. And so we have to be extremely mindful and very careful that after a year when we got all that money, that we can't be going and blowing a lot of money, especially on ongoing permanent things that could bite us later if we're not careful.
Well, thanks again, Kevin, for your insight there. And we'll keep everybody up to date on the latest in all those bits of news as we move forward here. So I know cybersecurity has been top of mind. It's been a big topic at CSBA. It was a big topic at Access Superintendents last week or two. It was actually nice seeing a lot of you there. So it was wonderful catching you in person. But wanted to just point out that the Federal Cybersecurity Agency, CISA, they released a report. And if you remember last year, there was about $1 billion in the Federal Cybersecurity Act that was earmarked towards improving cybersecurity in the U.S. And a big part of that was asking for this report from CISA, particularly in regards to schools. So this report comes out a week or two ago. We'll link to it here. And there's 3 key findings, none of which I think are going to surprise you, but it just underscores a lot of things that we've been talking about here. One is invest in security measures. And everyone knows we probably need more stuff to help us fight the cybersecurity battle. We don't always know what it is, and we still don't know where the funding is going to come for it, as we've discussed many times before. But that's the first recommendation. The second is recognize resource constraints. So you need stuff, but you don't have enough resources to put it together. And they're saying basically you just have to accept that fact. And they're asking school leaders that are not IT leaders to elevate this to one of their top priorities, because they see this as such a big threat. And in a week, if you just Google cybersecurity news in schools, you'll see Tucson got shut down this week, and Nantucket, and Des Moines, Iowa. There's several districts that are getting taken down on a regular basis. We know there's some notable ones here in the state that we've spoken about as well. The third one I think is interesting as well, is they don't mandate, but they're asking folks to report when there's been an incident, and trying to track all the incidents, the type of incidents they have, so that there's more information back in DC to help schools. It is worth at least checking out the executive summary of this report. But again, there's no huge surprises here. And as we said, the FCC has at least opened up some questions about funding this. We talk a lot about advocacy. This is a big deal. If this is supposed to be elevated to your, top things to be worried about, we always like to give you, what would you do? What can you do to try to make this better? And I can say nothing except try to advocate for more of the funding and resources that we need to fight this battle in schools, because we're certainly under-resourced right now. I will say this came up with Tasha Davenport at CSBA. She asked for a little help writing some cybersecurity articles for their newsletter. The second one was published today. So if you haven't opened up that CASBO newsletter in a while, open up the last one and the one today. There's some helpful articles in there about cybersecurity for non-technical leaders. And we're also going to host a webinar where we're going to talk non-technically about things you can do to try to improve your school's cybersecurity without having to break the bank or being a super IT expert. That's going to be March 2nd, and Capital Advisors team, we're going to do this together and try to support you in this time, because this is a big pressing issue. And I know you have a lot of competing priorities, but it is a big deal, and it could shut down your district if something terrible happens. So our goal is to try to prevent that with some knowledge and an ounce of prevention. With that, now, Kevin.
Yeah, please. I wanted to sort of give my, me, I always have an opinion. And we talked about it a little bit last time, that some of the national associations are actually opposing the effort. It's under consideration right now to open up the E-rate to be able to use that for cybersecurity. And there are some of the national organizations that are opposed to it. And the reason why they're opposed to it is they see it as sort of this black hole of very large expenditures, that if, in fact, LEAs use E-rate to deal with their cybersecurity problems, that it doesn't leave much for the real fundamental purpose, which is connectivity, devices, all that sort of thing. And instead, they think there ought to be a different fund established under a different entity. I can't remember which ones they've talked about, what the alternative entities are. But as they've talked about that, the reason why I sort of respectfully disagree is because I think it's a whole lot easier, particularly in the current environment back in Washington, D.C., which is one that is not going to be conducive to creating a new bureaucracy. We just would never see it. So to say you're not in favor of expanding E-rate to cover this, and you'd like to just create a new agency, I don't think is politically very realistic about. In fact, I think it's the equivalent of saying we'll do it in 5 years or 10 years from now. Whereas trying to tap into E-rate now, and E-rate ends up getting somewhat used or depleted because of it, creates obviously some traction around you need to put more money in. I think that's an easier lift than it is to say, by the way, create a separate agency and put tens of billions of dollars in it because we need it. I just think taking an entity that exists right now that has a lot of imperatives to its cause and saying it ought to include cybersecurity, and yes, it ought to be funded appropriately, is just an easier way to go. And that's just my own opinion. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because I believe that it's still an open comment period, and the FCC wants to know what your sentiment is about it. And again, there are a collection of some of the national associations that are representing LEAs that are opposing the use of E-rate. And if you feel differently or closer to kind of where I'm at on this issue, you really need to make your voice heard. I do know that there was a letter signed by almost 1,100 school districts across the country a couple of months ago that did get out there saying essentially what I'm saying, which we need to broaden the use of E-rate. So, we're not alone on that battle, but it is something that maybe you need to weigh in on if you guys have the, desire, especially I know we get viewers that are leadership in districts, including school board members, superintendents, and CBOs, but we've got a great history of reaching tech leaders in school districts who watch this. And to the extent that you can push this up and get the LEA's communication back to the FCC of sentiment in terms of broadening the E-rate, that would be great too.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I would just throw out a couple quick things. One is if we're going to send a funding stream into K-12 to build a thing, let's build the thing the right way. So if I'm going to send you a bunch of money to build a new building, but I don't give you the money for windows and doors, you got to figure that out on your own or go to another funding stream. It seems kind of silly. And I guess for me, I'm not trying to call the counter argument silly. I'm sorry if it seems that way. I'm fine if it comes from somewhere else. Just, I guess, let's make it easy and make sure that it does actually come, right? That's the worry for me.
It's a great,
eventually there would, sorry.
Yeah, it's a great perspective, Tim. It's about, we have enough trouble in public schools dealing with the number of bureaucracies we already have to deal with. So creating yet another agency that we're going to have to go to, because that's the idea here. It wouldn't be FCC, it would be some other agency of the federal government. Again, I'm sympathetic to that argument that we want to protect E-rate for some of the things that it does, but in this political environment, we're basically punting. The problem's never going to get solved if we're going to wait till another entity gets created.
Yeah, agreed. So thanks for your opinion there, Kevin. And again, everyone, I think right now the best thing we can do is advocate for support and definitely take a look at the executive summary in this CISA report. I think you'll find it interesting, and there'll be a few tidbits in there you can use. And definitely take a moment to register for that webinar. You'll find some useful benefits to joining that as well as a leader. Again, not super technical, but it'll be very helpful with some prescriptive thoughts on what you can do. With that, Kevin, there's a lot going on in DC right now. As we've all been hearing in the news, and the president had State of the Union comments. I think everyone's really kind of concerned about what does all this mean for education. Maybe you could fill us in on that, please.
Right. And so, of course, the president laid out in his State of the Union address, just, one proposal after another. And what it really is a statement of what they're for. And again, the president has ambitious ideas about investments in education in children and families, and a lot of things, frankly, that mirror the agenda we've seen actually executed here in California, universal meals and a number of other things that the president has wanted to see investments in that he could not get because even though Democrats held the House of Representatives, the margin was so narrow. And then you take a look at what we said, the same case in the U.S. Senate, that a couple of, obviously they're very conservative members, were not enough to get budget agreements in the magnitude of what the president wanted. Now, that said, since our last broadcast, we did get a budget for the current year. We did get an appropriations package, I should say, for the current year that did increase across a number of areas, including a number of areas that impact children and families and education, including Title I, a lot of the major areas of education funding. And yet they weren't huge increases, but they were increases. What the president laid out in his State of the Union address were goals that I just sort of have to kind of throw some cold water on the reality check here, which is that we're not going to get a lot of that stuff. It's a statement of what he's for, but the political reality suggests that our best gain under the circumstances in this Congress will be to secure a budget that is essentially identical to the one that we have in the current year, and that we don't get cut. What's going on, as you probably have figured out, is that the House of Representatives leadership really wants to try to exact a lot of cuts to the domestic side of spending. Now, they don't want to see cuts, of course, on the military side and a number of other, some of their priorities, but on the domestic side, they want to see an effort to try to get a balanced budget within a certain time frame, that if in fact they were successful, you'd have cuts of more than almost 35% to all domestic programs, including education. Well, I would tell you, don't worry about that, because the votes simply are not there, even amongst Republicans in the US Senate. In fact, it was Republicans in the US Senate who had blocked a lot of the cuts that were proposed every single year of the Trump administration. It was those Republicans and Republican leadership that blocked that. So what you do is you have a dynamic where Democrats might queue up a budget proposal that would in fact have big cuts to domestic spending, but there won't be a willingness in the US Senate, or certainly by the White House, to approve that. The great thing of what we get when there's paralysis in Washington, D.C., when they can't do anything, you automatically get the prior year appropriation level. And we don't have that in California. I kind of wish we did. It's sort of that safety net. You never do worse than you did in that prior budget. But we've got that at the federal level. So again, a lot of nice discourse about what people think there might be on both sides of the aisle. You know, Republicans who really want to try to do something about deficit spending and have a balance and lower taxes and a number of things that are on their plate. And a lot of the nice rhetoric on the Democrat side about the things that they'd like to see happen. The truth is almost none of it's going to happen on either side. And hopefully what it means for us is we don't see cuts at the federal level in education. But as Jack O'Connell liked to say all during our budget workshops, whatever you do, don't count on the federal government to come in and rescue you in any way at all financially, the way we had it during the pandemic. But of course, we're in a post-pandemic world. We're in an economic situation that's different. So I think most of us are not counting on the feds to bail us out. So that's a little bit on the federal landscape. We've got CSBA's Coast to Coast trip coming toward the end of April. I think it's going to set records for the largest sort of onslaught of California education leaders descending on Washington, D.C. at the same time to advocate on different parts of the education agenda. Again, giving voice to a lot of critical issues. But again, in a congressional environment in both houses where they're probably not going to be spending a lot of money, it'll be an opportunity to educate people on policy. But I don't know that we're going to get to move the needle very far, particularly regarding adequate funding, if that's part of the message.
Well, thanks for the updates there, Kevin. And again, we'll keep you posted on DC events as we move forward here. And there's some implications for you certainly on the state budget and the federal budget as the economy starts to cool off here. So let's hope for a positive outcome in the immediate and upcoming future. I wanted to touch base on something in technology that's been really kind of polarizing in society, but particularly in education, and that is ChatGPT. If you haven't heard of this yet, it's basically artificial intelligence. A company called OpenAI puts it out on the internet, and it is a very powerful tool. It's really one of the first tools that can create its own content. And this is concerning in education because we're asking students to be creative, to look at something and then come up with their own thoughts. So if we can have artificial intelligence now thinking for people, this is cause for concern. Now, I'll just say that there are many school districts that are actually out there actively banning OpenAI, some with caveats, you can use it here and not here, but there's some that are just flat out banning. It is kind of a slippery slope, and I'm not going to take a side in this one, because if you look at the history of automation, when something got automated, people would come out and say, you know, whatever this thing is, it's over. You know, we're going to lose as a society. Things like the calculator, and things like, you know, autocorrect on our keyboards. You know, there was a concern that we wouldn't be able to think for ourselves anymore in terms of math, or think, you know, be able to spell anymore, to write words. You know, yet here we are with these pieces of automation in place, and we've learned to adapt and grow with them. I will say that we have to think carefully about how this tool is used in schools, if you choose to use it, and get creative about how we challenge students now to leverage a tool like this and do their own critical thinking, to make sure that the tool has done what we've asked it to do, and to make sure that it represents their voice and, you know, their perspective on a topic. So, you know, this is a hot topic out there. If you haven't read about it, I'll put a little link in there that I think you'll find fascinating, that kind of explores both sides, right? It is, you know, we're banning it. Where should we ban it? But how could we potentially use it as a tool for kids to learn? I will say, if you have heard about banning, it's going to get a little tougher to ban, because just today, I want to say today in the news, you might be watching this in a few days, but just say recently, Microsoft came out with their own Bing search engine, which Bing now goes and will do an AI query at ChatGPT for you, which means it'll go do a ChatGPT search. So now you've got to ban Bing. And there's other ways to get to it as well. Plus, Google came out with their own competitor called Bard today. So we have so many B's on the show with your B acronyms, than now this. But I guess where I'm going with this is investing the time to understand the tool, empowering your teachers with the skills that they need to get the kids to use these things creatively. And yes, there are also tools to let you know when someone has used ChatGPT and turned in a paper. That didn't exist, a month or so ago. So there are some tools in your arsenal, some knowledge that you can share there. I think you'll enjoy reading this article. And if you haven't heard anything about ChatGPT, you'll definitely want to at least have a reasonable understanding, because this could very easily pop up at one of your board meetings and become a hot topic.
Great.
And Kevin, I didn't know if you had anything to add there.
No, it's a real interesting issue, and I have been following it.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to just say, thanks everybody for joining. And, as always, if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and click the subscribe button. We've gotten so many subscribers. We value you all. And please help us spread the word about this. We try to get to it every couple times a month as new stories arise. And we really appreciate all your support over the couple of years that we've been doing this. So thanks so much, Kevin. We'll look forward to chatting with you in a couple of weeks. And everybody hang in there, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.